Hey everyone, and welcome back to Carys Garage. If you're new to the channel, thanks so much for tuning in. On this episode, it's going to be Memory Lane, episode 8, and we're going to talk about a very special car I used to have and how it kind of changed my outlook on classic cars, how I worked on cars, and the cars that I really loved. And stay tuned for the very end. I found a couple of very not so great videos I took on an old camera of driving the car and kind of going around the car and looking at it, so that'll be pretty cool to check out. But let's get started right after this. So what we'll do is we'll talk about the car. We'll talk about a little bit of the back history of how I found the car and the stuff I did to it. It was pretty extensive. So the car we're going to talk about today is this one right here. It's a 1960 Citroen ID19. Now, if you don't know what a Citroen is, I won't get too much in the history unless you guys really want me to. There's a lot of videos out there. There were two different models in this era. There was the DS19 and the ID19. This particular car, being the ID19, was kind of more base model, had a very simplistic dash. It had a 4-speed manual with a clutch pedal. The DSs didn't have a clutch pedal. They were hydraulically actuated. It was pretty complicated. It had a conventional brake pedal, not the button, had a master cylinder, manual steering. The only thing hydraulic was the suspension. In 2006, I was actually talking to a British fellow, and he had mentioned that he knew where some of these cars were locally, not too far from where I was hanging out. So we went and drove by, and there was several of them in this guy's yard. No one was home. I tried a few times. Nothing ever happened. But then I went out to a car show in 2006. It was in July, and I got to ride in a 1971, 72. I think it was a 71 DS21 Palace, and I instantly fell in love. It was incredible. So I came back after that trip, and I drove by this guy's house, knocked on the door, and he was actually home. Talked to him for quite a long time. And I ended up looking at this car and making a deal for it. It had sat for a while, and I was able to buy it, brought it home, and I didn't touch it for a long time. I did a lot of research, a lot of looking. This is what it looked like the first day I saw it. It hadn't run in a while, so we were able to get it to start up, and the hydraulics actually pumped up. So the car lifted up, and I was able to look underneath it, and it was incredible. It was 100% rust free, no rust whatsoever on it. It was just absolutely incredible. And as time went on and I worked on it, there was several little things that weren't quite correct on it, which I'll point out. But overall, it was just such an amazing car. You know, the paint was pretty faded, but I went ahead and picked it up, and these are the pictures of it on the trailer. And I brought it home. Now, there's a lot of pictures, so we're going to try and rush through a bunch of these pictures because I took way too many. But I was pretty proud of it. So what I started doing was really learning about the car because it was completely different from anything I'd worked on before. You know, I'd messed around with air-cooled Volkswagens, a couple of diesels, and then I got this guy, and it was such a unique, interesting learning curve that I had to take everything I knew about cars and how they should work, toss them out the window, start from fresh, and learn how the French did it. And it was actually pretty incredible. So what I ended up doing was I took all the bodywork off the front, all the bodywork off the back, took all the wheels off. I had to go through the entire braking system. I took the front disc brake calipers apart, which are incredibly complicated and very odd. Took them completely apart, cleaned them up, rebuilt them. I had to rebuild the entire suspension system. All the spheres had to be rebuilt. The bump stops were all completely destroyed, so I had to do all those. And just generally go through all the little stuff on the car and learning as I went. That's what all these pictures are right here. A few of the things that are rather incorrect on the car. Piece that goes under the front bumper, that was actually off of a much earlier DS. And if you look at the front seats, those were not correct to the car. Originally, I should have had a red velour, but the front seats were actually out of a 57 DS19. I ended up, and we'll talk about that, I think, in the next episode of Memory Lane. I ended up buying an entire collection of Citroens from this estate, basically. The guy had passed away, and I bought it from his widow, and there was a bunch of cars, way too many cars, and a lot of parts. And one of them was a 1957 DS19. It was serial number 6000 something. I still have pictures of it. But I spent a lot of time getting the car going, and this is pretty much how it turned out. I ended up making a special set of headlamps, actually from a Renault Dauphine, that were concave. I like the look of it. I thought it was neat. I ended up putting the the yellow bulb covers, so you had the yellow amber headlights, which would have been correct on a French car. Since this was an American car, it wasn't correct, but that's just what I did on it. I thought it looked really neat. And the car just, it came out amazing. It was an incredible driving car. All I really want is to be able to get another old D series Citroen, because once you've driven and experienced one of those, it's absolutely incredible. And it kind of ruins you on a lot of other cars. Now, the next D, whenever I get one, I want a Citromatic, which is the one that has the 4-speed manual but it has no clutch pedal, like I had mentioned earlier. And it's quite a bit more complicated, but it's incredible. It really is just amazing. Now, at that point, I wasn't all that great with paintwork, so I was able to polish it a little bit, make it look decent, but I didn't really understand, doing a cut and buff and stuff on it. So this is a picture of after I sold it to a guy in Texas, and they actually did a bit of a paint correction on it, brought the paint back. Now, the car had been repainted once in the past. I know that because Citroen never painted the panels on the car. They painted off the car, and there was a few spots of overspray, but it was done really, really well. Now, one of the really cool things was I ended up kind of sort of starting a French car group here locally. And there was an older gentleman that went to one of the breakfast gatherings we went to. This is after I had sold all my Citroens. But, I still love French cars. I still have several now. And I ended up talking to him kind of in detail. And I'd mentioned that I used to have this red 1960 ID19. And he had mentioned a gentleman's name who had once owned the car. And he told me that, yeah, my dad bought that car brand new. So he ended up sending me a couple of pictures of when his dad bought it new, and this is one of the pictures that he had. It was actually a color photo from 1961, and he told me that his dad, when he bought it home, and then it's kind of funny because I was able to connect the dots to every single person who owned it before me, so I learned the entire history of the car, which I thought was pretty cool. And now, sit back and enjoy some really terrible videos I took with an old digital camera that was not that great, but at the time that's what I had, and I'm glad I was able to capture some of these videos. Kind of brings me back.
Okay, here's a walk around of my 1960 Citroen ID19 with 54,000 original miles. Here's starting up, and we're going to take a little drive in the 1960 Citroen ID19. We'll just go take it around the block. And if you hear the clunk, that's the ball joint that I need to replace shortly. Runs and drives absolutely beautifully. It floats down the highway with ease as a Citroen D Series properly should. Somebody had added in these Stewart Warner gauges at some point, which is nice to know your oil pressure and your water temperature. Also this radio, which is quite interesting, but it works and it kind of cleans up the middle of an ID dash, which is normally kind of bland. Here I will go ahead and drop the suspension and then raise it back up so you can see that it works properly as it should. And it is a single piston hydraulic pump, so it is a little bit slower than a 7-piston, but it still works just fine. And there's a little overview and run around and drive of my 1960 Citroen ID19.
And there is my old beloved 1960 Citroen ID19 that I called Jean-Pierre was its name. One of these days I will find another one. I definitely 100% regret selling this car, like several of the other cars, but this one definitely holds a special place in my heart. I actually have a Citroen chevron tattooed on my arm because of how much I love this car. And one of these days I will find another one that's the right car and I will get it, but I just have to find it and be able to afford it. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and catch you guys on the next video.